Hi everyone, welcome. Wow, there's a lot of lens flare happening here. Let me see if I can shield the lens of the camera a little bit from these bright lights. The systems I'm going to be checking in on today are these two black tubs with African night crawlers in them. It's been 12 days since we checked in on these systems. They're 158 days old, fed 14 times so far, and I got a nice assortment of stuff for them. Pretty generous feeding coming up, so I'm going to get the systems up on the bench, slip on a glove, and we're going to get to work. What these systems got fed last time is this stuff here, Savoy cabbage. Similar to regular cabbage, I guess, but a little bit different in terms of its appearance. Got these little wavy patterns to the leaves as opposed to regular cabbage, which is a little bit more smooth. Slightly different flavor too. So besides cabbage, I think we gave them coffee last time too. Coffee and cabbage. So a little bonus coming in here is a couple banana peels to complement the coffee and cabbage. And it doesn't seem like all that much food, even though it might appear like a lot visually. A lot of times I'll gauge things by their weight, and it seems to me like that tray of food wasn't all that heavy. The other thing I gauge by weight oftentimes are my bins. When I bring them over from the bench, when I bring them over to the bench from the shelf, I can tell if they're possibly running a little bit more damp or possibly running closer to their storage capacity than what I normally like to do. So just by their weight, I can often tell where things stand with my systems. These coffee filters that were resting out here across the center of the systems were just showing us where we last fed down here. And those feeding zone indicators, as I refer to them, can get reused now as supplemental bedding down in the feeding zone, since we got a couple new coffee filters coming in with today's feeding. And you can see all these nice leaves that we sprinkled out across the top. This stuff will now no longer just serve as a lovely top dressing. It'll just get blended in to the bed as we work our way through here, and just become additional bedding to give the wormies more and more real estate to be in. So let's see how they did with that coffee and cabbage feeding from last time. Ooh, what happened here? It would seem that I must have fed something recently that was held together with a rubber band, and the rubber band sort of snuck in with the feeding, so this is an opportune time to remove it. And well, how do you like that? The cabbage is virtually untouched. I wonder if perhaps the stuff came in here without first being frozen. I mean, the stuff that they're getting today is most definitely frozen. Just came out of the freezer. Most of it is still rock hard. And, well, I guess perhaps it's a blessing in disguise that we're back in here to feed them after only 12 days. I do have another pair of systems. Normally, it's sort of a first in, first out sort of thing. You know, everyone, once they get fed, goes to the back of the line. And then my interval between feedings is pretty consistent. But there's another pair of bins that are now actually 12 days since they were last, these are 12 days since they were last fed. And I've got another pair of systems that have been 13 days since they were last fed. They were going to get fed tomorrow, where there would have been 14 days in between the feedings. And I just felt like I would want to come back in here first, because the cabbage we gave them didn't seem like all that much, and I figured it would be gone by now. But perhaps by chance, I guess, since it seems like they were able to make virtually no use of the food I gave them last time, it does seem like a good thing that we're back in here to feed them today. I'm even wondering if perhaps it would make good sense just to keep that stuff that we gave them last time, keep it out, kind of swap it out, perhaps return it to the freezer and actually give that stuff a chance to freeze. I really don't remember. I didn't watch the video thoroughly from last time. I just sort of breezed through it to get a sense of what was last fed. That's kind of how I knew there was Savoy cabbage placed in here last time, but I didn't watch the video from the last feeding in great detail. So I can't recall if this stuff was possibly brought down here for the worms without first being thoroughly frozen. Here, on the other hand, I'm sure both systems were fed pretty similarly. Both systems would have been given a number of stems from the heads of cabbage that were processed into a nice big generous meal for humans. And I'm sure that both systems would have been given some of the leaves too. But in this system, unlike what we saw in bin number 1, all I see is a little bit of one stem. And I'm usually pretty careful to distribute the food supply, the feeding, to the systems I'm feeding evenly. So to have so many leftovers remaining in bin number 1 and so few in bin number 2 kind of makes me wonder if perhaps what was fed over here in bin number 2 did actually get thoroughly frozen, but for whatever reason the stuff that ended up in bin number 1 didn't. I am liking the idea of removing this stuff and throwing it back in my freezer for a little while longer. Part of the reason for that is these little shoots that you can see growing out of the stem over here, and I saw it happening over there even more. These little growths coming out are usually indicators that the food that I gave the worms just didn't get frozen thoroughly enough and needs more time in the freezer. So I like that idea. I think we're gonna do that. We're gonna put this stuff back in the freezer and give it another chance to actually freeze through. Interestingly enough, this piece of stem, little piece of cabbage stem over here, already has a certain degree of breakdown occurring that seems to be piquing the interest of the worms. I could see some mush coming out of this one over here. So it's sort of actively decomposing and drawing the attention of the worms. But yeah, why don't we just set that stuff aside over there. We'll exclude it when we reset, and I'll take it with me back to the freezer, and it'll get another chance at being broken down in the worm bins at some future date once it's actually had a chance to freeze and has much less likelihood of wanting to continue growing. And you know, this piece of decaying cabbage over here has really got some powerful odor to it. So that's the reason I turned it over, so I don't have to sit here sniffing it. Once my little transport container with which I brought down the foods for today's feeding has been emptied out with the foods we're applying now, I'll be able to transfer our leftovers from the last feeding that didn't get broken down back into my transport container and back up to the freezer the stuff will go. But now I think we've made a nice opening down here into which we can place these banana peels for each system. And I don't know, it's just more of the same, I guess. More Savoy cabbage going in, along with even more stem over here. Stem of the head of cabbage. This stuff's definitely been in the freezer for a long time now. I guess if it was 12 days ago since I fed the stuff that didn't manage to break down over here, and that stuff was probably sitting around for a couple days, or was placed in the freezer for a little while. It's probably from 2 weeks ago. This portion of leftover just didn't really make it into the recipe and remained, so my hope is that what we're placing in here today isn't just going to have the same outcome as what happened here now with the stuff that just didn't seem to want to break down in bin number 1. It'll be a little bit of Groundhog Day if that occurs. So let's give them the rest of what we have here. as far as their feeding, these new coffee filters will rest out on the top and use those as our replacement feeding zone indicators. And then this stuff here, perhaps I'll even run this stuff out in the garden and give it a quick rinse just in case there's any worms on this stuff, just so I don't end up placing any unsuspecting wormies into my freezer. That would not be good for them. Perhaps if I rinse these off in the garden first, any worms that might be on them can be set free, and that'll be their lucky day. So I've got some additional bedding that we can complement these systems with. And you know, many of my systems have been getting their plastic covers removed because my sense has been that the material in those systems is getting very damp, so I wanted to no longer confine the moisture to remaining down in the system, but rather replace the plastic covers with a more porous top covering, in most cases just some newspaper, which would allow for some of the system's moisture to escape. In the case of these systems, though, they're only 158 days of age. I mean, in the past, 158 days would have often meant that I was already anxious to get them to harvest and bring them to an end, but more recently I've been running my systems quite a bit longer. So I'm seeing systems like these that are 158 days old now getting feeding number 15 as being sort of in their prime. You know, they're still going to have quite a few more feedings to go before we start thinking about harvesting them. So in the case of these systems, I'm definitely going to be replacing the plastic covers so that whatever moisture's in here remains and aids in giving the worms a nice comfortable space to live in. And I bet you they really like all this leafy matter getting blended in. This stuff all serves as, at least to me, it seems like very natural materials that are probably very similar to what they would encounter out in nature if these were wild worms out in the woods somewhere. And I've got my box of leaves handy, so what we could do once we've tilled up the material out on the outer edges and aerated everything and blended in all these leaves is just top dress the systems with even a little bit more. So why don't we do that now? So we've given them bedding, we've given them food, we've given them grit, and we've even removed some of the foods that, for whatever reason, did not manage to go anywhere over the past 12 days. So we're going to invoke Plan B on those bits of cabbage, try to get them back in the freezer in the hopes that perhaps a few more days of sub-zero temperatures will be enough to bring any sort of inclination that those pieces of cabbage might have to continue growing, bring that to an end and possibly make them into a better worm food than they were when they were fed into these systems 12 days ago. So, not much left to do here. Just feels like something might be missing, but it'll probably come to me as I'm editing the video. Or maybe not. Perhaps we've covered all the bases. I think we may have. It's unusual for me not to forget things these days in my old age. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.